So, Metaphor of Meltdown, Finding Personal Meaning in Collective Crisis. By Doug Hamill, that's me. I'm going to deal with mostly the United States economy. Why the United States? This is our percentage of our GDP, who we deal with. That big, large, blue, purple slice, 79.84, that's the United States of America. So if our banks are great, that's fantastic. What if we have no money to put in them? We deal with them. They're our lifeblood. Just like Trudeau said, was it we're the mouse and they're the lion or the elephant? The elephant. Thank you very much. Sorry, Pierre. It's kind of a hero of mine. So this is what really opened everything up, like I said. This is from Michael Maloney's book, Investing in Gold and Silver. And one thing I want you to know, every single person I refer to here saw the housing bubble coming. They tried telling people, they tried getting on TV, but of course the shampoo people of mainstream, lamestream media just kind of laughed it all off. Michael Maloney was one of them. So I read his book, Investing in Gold and Silver, and this is what really shook me. So for the past 2,400 years, a pattern has repeated in which governments debase and dilute the money supply until a point where the common psyche of the populace and the collective mind of a country begin to feel something isn't right, and I'm assuming that's why we're all here in a way, or you're just a close friend and you're giving me some emotional support, which I greatly appreciate. So I'm talking psyche here. We're going to deal with psyche quite a bit, okay? So I just want to point that out, that's where that started. So here's my outline. We're going to go into the history of money and currency, gold standard. We're going to talk about Jung, the banking system and the creation of money, plus the creation of consciousness, back to Jung. It's going to be kind of a back and forth mode for the night. World reserve currency, the fiat dollar, currency wars, bubble blowing, and inflation. And then we have a bathroom break. So this is hopefully going to take me 1 hour. I call it bathroom or bail. So you realize if this ain't what I'm into, I'm out of here. So I give you a little door, okay? You can go. Then we'll get into the subprime meltdown, the derivatives, what's called a fire economy, the stimulus, the rampant fraud that's occurring in the system at this point, and the global debt bubble. I should have got rid of the little slash there, forgive me. And then at the very end, I'm going to tie this all together as living with the metaphor, how we as individuals, ourselves, with our families, in communities, and in the world can deal with this coming paradigm, which I really think is an initiation point for the entire planet, is what we're looking at. Okay? So let's get right into it. History of money and currency. We've always traded. Humankind has traded for as long as we can remember. Seashells have been traded, grains, rice, those kinds of things have been traded. And of course, Canada was built on the beaver pelt trade. And I love the physician saying, luckies are less irritating. So the 2 points with this slide, tobacco in times of war was money. I mean, if you wanted something, tobacco was a form of currency. So what are we looking at? We're looking at something of value. Value is a very important aspect of what creates money. And the other thing I like about this is, watch out what mainstream says. The doc says cigarettes are good. They're just less irritating, okay? So over time, they had to devise a system of coming up with what actually creates money. It has to be durable, right? You got a coin, you don't want it falling apart. Divisible, you should be able to denominate, you can make change. It's a unit of account. It actually has 10 cents on it or whatever. Portable, we know what that is. Medium of exchange. Fungible, that is, if I give you some rice and you want to put it in your private bank, 8 weeks from now, it's not going to be very good. So the money's gone. So fungible is, it's going to, it'll last. It's durable. And the final one is a store of value over time. I have here in my hand a 1967 silver Canadian dollar. Okay? In 1967, a gallon of gas cost 33 cents. All right? We would take this silver dollar and go and buy, my math, as Mark, you know, my math's not that great, so something around 3.33 gallons of gas with this dollar. Okay? Now we're in 2012. At $1.26 a liter, a dollar will buy you almost 1 liter. But the silver content in this is valued at $32. It's an ounce. Right now, if I want to go get an ounce of silver, it's $32. And I can buy 25.39 liters with this silver dollar. It is a store of value. It holds its value, as opposed to the other money, which, I mean, everything's inflated. We'll get into that later. So, are people okay with that? The silver holds its value because it's a precious metal. Come on in. No worries. Didn't miss much, don't worry. So, here we go to who else but Sir Isaac Newton. I mean, the guy did everything, right? There's that famous line when they're flying up in the NASA spaceship and they say, who's flying the plane now? They want to know who it was. And the answer came back, Newton, because it was his mathematical principles that were guiding the plane. Well, he was the guy that created the gold standard. He knew that you could not have, that gold value would be held in trust by an appointed bank. That government or bank could only print a ratio of currency. Okay? So a currency is a receipt for gold or silver. They could only print a ratio of currency in proportion to the amount of gold and or silver that would be held in reserve. Ergo, I love that word, the title Reserve Bank. All right? That's the gold standard, and it started in 1717. So your money was always had value somewhere in reserve. Okay? Are we good there? And by the way, ask questions along the way. If I'm losing you, please ask questions. I love teaching this stuff, as I've bored Mike many times with this. So here's a fact. I'm presenting nothing but facts, hopefully. This is the United States $5 bill. This is back when 5 silver dollars is payable to the bearer on demand. Silver was in the bank. It's a receipt. It's currency. Okay? Money's in the bank. This is currency. That's really important. Am I right so far? Good. Okay. Review. Humans have, and I go through some reviews just so we're all on the same page. Humans have traded almost anything at one point, as long as both parties found value in the object. 7 factors constituted what money was over time, most important being a store of value. Physical gold and physical silver are money. Everything else is currency. It's a receipt for that physical gold and physical silver that's held in the reserve bank. Isaac Newton created the gold standard to ensure that currency was created in a ratio to the amount of gold that's in the bank. Are we all good with that?
But why gold? Is that no use?
No, you'll see.
That's what
That's a very good point. Yeah. Okay, now we're going to go to Jungian metaphor, and hopefully this is your answer to that question. Jung was Freud's heir apparent. Freud, Jung, and they're ready for a wild night out in Zurich. Can't you tell? A wild night. Okay? All those analysts just partying it up, dancing on the table. He split from Freud. Now I'm going to deal with gold. Why is it so valuable? Gold in the psyche. Psyche and psychology. Psyche is the Greek word for butterfly, inspired by the butterfly's powers of transformation. The same word is used to define the totality of the human soul, psyche. The study of the psyche or the human soul, psychology. Okay? Out of all the psychologists, I personally like Jung the best. His work continues to expand and expand and expand. Every time I change and I go back, his work has changed. How did he do that? So, dream series of one of Jung's patients. The dream is a small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. Jung did most of his work with dreams. This woman dreamt, these are her drawings actually, the patient dreamt that she was trapped inside the rocks. She's lonely, isolated, no friends, nowhere to go. Next dream. Lightning strikes the rocks, and there is a gold shimmer on top of these rocks, a golden colored shimmer. In subsequent visits, they identified all those rocks and what the gold was. The gold was her friends, her family, her community. That's what happens sometimes. We get wrapped up, we don't see what's right in front of us. So the psyche itself, from dreams that bubble up from the unconscious, chooses gold to be the ultimate metaphor for value reflected by the soul. Also, Consider it. This is what I call, guess the religion. You can pick it out. Okay, gold is chosen to adorn the world's sacred objects in the most mysterious of human endeavors, which is, I don't want to say religions, but what would you call it? Worship, you know? So every single one, we have, as you were saying brilliantly before, this is the, you know, the Protestant faith, you know, the crown, Roman Catholic, Jewish, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, and of course, let's not forget America's most favorite religion, the Oscar. It's covered in gold. So gold in our society is the metaphor for value. The metaphor of silver. This is a pretty good book, The Dollar Meltdown. A lot of these books I've read part, and then I pick up another one and I read a part. It says in there, we should not be surprised that silver was thought to represent truth, and that the word argue comes from the same root as the Latin word for silver, argentum. So, at the dawn of our democracy, what we're living out right now, which people would argue it could be the tail end of this particular situation, argentum, the root word of argument. The art of argument was the Socratic method. Socrates came up with it, and this is how they discovered truth. The form of debate encouraged critical thinking where two individuals would argue the virtues of their respective points. And this is fascinating. Often the debate presented a third option, which was never considered. And that, what I think, is almost a little piece of gold right there. It's not us against them. It's not the duality that we get locked into. It can create a third, an unknown before this debate occurred, which could be truth, metaphorically. The Energy of Money. This is an amazing book. Joe Dominguez, his story is fascinating. He worked in the stock market, tried doing all kinds of things for 5 years, quit. Then he just said, you know, I'm just going to focus on what's enough, and I'm going to do really minor investments, and he retired by age 30. And for the rest of his life, he had New Roadmap Foundation, which has given over $7 million to underfunded people in ghettos and such for education, because that's where he grew up. Page 54. Money is something we choose to trade our life energy for. Sorry. I'm going to repeat it again. Money is something we choose to trade our life energy for. Every day we get up, you know, and off we go, giving up those hours of the day, our life energy, for that bit of money that comes at the end. So there's an incredibly intimate connection. It's our life energy. We're deciding to say, yep, you can have it. Cheers. There's all kinds of names for that. You can call it slavery. You can call it rent. You can call it whatever you like. But I just want to bring these things forward to expand the concept of what is money and what is value. Metaphor review. Jung, a student of Freud, discovered a great many aspects of the psyche. In the human psyche, gold is the metaphor for the ultimate sense of value. At the dawn of democracy, silver was metaphorical of truth. Currency or money is something that we trade our life energy for. So we're already into a new context. So just kind of hold that context and we'll roll into the banking system. And I got nothing against banks. God, you know, it's a wonderful life. He ran a little bank there. Jimmy Stewart, yeah. There was a great thing going on the internet, by the way. Move your money out of major banks into small local communities, and their whole model was the buildings and loan. What was their name again? It was a buildings and loan. I remember. I'm pretty sure. What was the name of the family? You guys remember? It's a Wonderful Life. Anyway, I can't remember the name of the family. Sorry. Banking system. It's well enough. This is Henry Ford, a quote from Henry Ford, and this is, hold on to this, because what you're going to see, this starts making sense. It's well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there'd be a revolution before morning. Something in that one. And then good old John Kenneth Galbraith, economist, brilliant thinker. The process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. Be prepared for some repulsion. Okay, creation of currency. I'm just going to get onto my whiteboard here, and we're going to the Federal Reserve. Okay, the Federal Reserve is there's a lot of upside down pyramids in this particular thing. Is that big enough for everybody? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. The Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank that pays its owners 6% profit. It is not federal. It is not a reserve. All other central banks are the same. Okay, you can read that in an amazing book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. Can't remember the guy's name. Here's how they make money. So the Federal Reserve, what they do is, you have the government here. The government wants, it's got to pay for a new social welfare program. Okay, it goes to the Fed. We need some money. They write a blank check, okay, to the government, and the government fills it out for however much. And what happens is they're buying bonds for the country, okay, treasury bonds. So, for example, sorry, I'm just skipping something here. So they got treasury bonds. So they will print the currency for the government. They print the currency. They charge the government interest for that currency that the government gets for doing whatever they want to do, building roads, houses, welfare programs, war, whatever. And they will charge the government an interest rate, okay? And that interest rate, let's just say here's the people, a whole bunch of people. And then, so let's just use, say, $1,000 as an example. They give the government $1,000 in currency, and then the government turns around and it charges the income tax, okay, the income tax to pay for the principal from this private bank and the interest from this private bank, okay? Yeah, I know it's odd, isn't it? But it's true. Therefore, all money is created out of debt. The people pay that debt. The more money that's printed, the more debt, the more we have to pay. The Income Tax Act came into being at the same time that the Federal Reserve was signed on, which was 1913. 1913. So there's your first. And remember the Fed. This is the Fed. So remember the first quote about the revolution before morning? Okay? So that's how the Fed creates money and gives it to the government, and then we have to pay that bill. So let's just go over it again. The Fed's a privately owned bank, pays 6% dividends. It's not federal, nor it is a reserve. You might not be able to see this. This is off of the Federal Reserve website, and it says right here, dividends are by law 6% per year. Also, it is completely unanswerable to Congress or the government. It is entirely on its own. And Ron Paul, who gets a real hard time, is trying to pass a audit the Fed bill in Congress. And it was mostly the Democrats that tried to vote it down, but it passed in a landslide. I don't know the numbers, sorry.
So can I buy stock in the Fed?
Yeah, no, what does it say? I'd have to go back. Can I answer that after?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. If you like, wait till the end of the slideshow. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston from a little article called Putting It Simply. When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover the check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it's creating money. This is the third Federal Reserve in U.S. history. Okay? The other two were pretty much destroyed because they were destroying the country itself. Okay, remember how we had the $5 bill and you could return it for 5 silver pieces on demand? Now, this is a Federal Reserve note. There is no value, there is no truth connected to this note. It is a Federal Reserve note. Vanna White, they've created that out of nowhere. All currency is loaned into existence with interest. the Income Tax Act came into being to pay that principal and the interest. The currency is based on debt. This system is repeated in Canada, and it started back in the early 80s. I'm sorry I put so much attention into the American system to get this. I lack on some of the Canadian aspects, but again, I go back to the first slide, 79% of our trades with the U.S. Let's find out what's going on.
We don't have a Federal Reserve Bank.
It's called the Bank of Canada.
Are they printing?
As far as I know, it is a privately owned bank as well. Okay, now I'm going to go into what's called fractional reserve banking. So this is our banks right here. Okay, I'm going into the BMO. I go into the BMO. This is me with my little house I want to get. Okay? Bank of Montreal. This is called fractional reserve lending. I asked the Bank of Montreal for $100,000 to buy a house. Okay? They write in their ledger, 100,000. This is, what do you call that? Sorry, a debit, right? Help me here. Adrian, is that correct? And then they're going to, sorry, it says debit, credit, okay? And they get credit 100,000. So these two balance out, and in the bookkeeping of the Fed, you don't have to write anything into the books because they cancel each other out. Now, at the BMO, I'm sure you probably have to write down what happens. So I take out a loan, I sign my loan, they give me the money, okay? $100,000 springs into existence, all right? Now they get to do what's called fractional reserve lending, and that they keep 10% in the bank of this. I don't call it fractional, I call it fictional reserve banking. They keep 10%, and then they get to loan out 90% to their buddy in the other bank. And then he keeps 10%, and then he loans out, help me again, Mark, around, roughly? 81,000, thank you. This continues until this pyramid gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And who's at the bottom? We, the people. To quote a phrase, and again, at the bottom of the Fed triangle, paying the income tax, we, the people. Are you starting to see a pattern? This is what's happening right now. I know it's shocking, right? Is your mind repelled? Thank John Kenneth Galbraith for that. Fractional reserve banking. Okay, review. The Federal Reserve was passed in 1913. Federal Reserve, Fed, is a privately owned bank, pays 6% to its shareholders. I doubt you're going to be able to buy a share. You have to be a Rothschild or somebody probably. The Fed prints currency for the U.S. government and the banking system. It charges the government interest on that currency. Government taxes the citizens to pay the principal and the interest. Currency is created out of debt. The cycle is never ending. Once you sign a loan, that currency comes into being, leveraged against your assets. Again, we, with the physical, the real, grounded assets, we're the ones holding up these systems. Okay? We, the people. Banks inflate the currency supply through fractional reserve lending. The system exists in Canada as well as all other central banks. I just need a little sip. Okay, let's get into the fun stuff. The creation of consciousness. We've dealt with the creation of currency. Now we're getting into the creation of consciousness. Jung identified many of these psychological concepts, things that are common in our vocabulary: introvert, extrovert. If any of you are familiar with the Myers-Briggs test, that's his. The lie detector comes from his particular studies. But what we're concerned with today is going to be the ego, the self, the shadow, and this whole process of what's called projection. So I'm just going to do a brief map up here on the board because we're going to refer back to it, okay? So, the soul is a circle. Plato says the soul is a circle. So there's the circle, the psyche, the entirety of the self. This line is the threshold of consciousness. Looks like a Chinaman in a hat. This here is the self at the center. Okay? What Jung termed the self, the totality of being. It's our awareness, let's say, some of it of which we're unconscious. So we have the threshold of consciousness. I'll just say C, because I can't print that fast. Threshold of consciousness. Now this lower half Very, very interesting. This is the wisdom consciousness of the body. This is what the body is trying to relate to you through its natural impulses, through its explorations of the natural world itself. So this area here donates wisdom of the body, let's say. Okay? Up here, that's the ego. It's this great little rectangle. Because I think I might be getting ahead of myself. Well, just hang on there, kids. It is the center of consciousness, okay? That rectangle. And I draw a rectangle because we're in kind of rectangular, angular buildings. This is what consciousness creates. We step out into that amazing world out there full of all sorts of impulses and everything, and you will not find a straight line. So the wisdom of the body is also experienced out there in the wisdom of nature itself, a complete other. Okay? So this here is what we will call the ego I. Now I just have to go on a slide. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Yeah, the self. Enlightenment doesn't occur from sitting around visualizing images of light, but from integrating the darker aspects, okay? Darker aspects will be found in the wisdom of the body, into the conscious personality, the ego. Self represents the totality of being which we can mine for greater and greater amounts of energy with conscious work. All right? So now we're moving off to the ego. We talked about it, the ego I. It's the central organizing principle. It's the mode of judgment. It is not in accord with the world of the natural impulses. Okay? It exists, but it is there. I'm getting ahead of myself. All conscious thinking is out of accord with the order of the body. It's not the ego's job, I'd missed something, to dictate to the wisdom body, but to bring its impulse system into relationship with the conditions of the environment that the ego itself has constructed. I know that's a lot. Basically what it is you could say that this whole aspect, what I'm trying to describe, would be called culture. Culture is a cooperation between the self and the ego. The self, all that is unknown. Okay? I think like I might be losing a few, but are we all right? We're good? Okay? Okay, so the ego is the central organizing principle, yet its mode of judgment is not in accord with the world of the natural impulse. Remember, I'm not saying that either one is bad. That's not it at all. The ego is fantastic. It tells me to wear pants. It tells me to get up in the morning. It tells me to eat. It tells me to, how to organize thoughts. The ego's a fantastic thing. It gives continuity. It gives continuity. The thing is you got to create it. The first half of your life is to create a strong ego, and the second half is to let it go. Let the other that's been trying to come up in. And that is the job of culture. When you're in a culture, well, we're in a culture, but I wouldn't say it connects with this one very well. Is that better? Probably better if I just free flow. Okay, let's move on. Here, in the wisdom of the body, is what's called the shadow. Woo! Okay? Now we've heard this was a famous radio show, Only the Shadow Knows. The shadow here is the ego's blind spot. Those things, either culturally or from our family or even from our own ego desires, these things that pop up in us and we don't like, we repress and we push them down into the shadow. And the only way, I'll just read that here, the ego's blind spot, the shadow, is the unconscious repository for all the aspects of ourselves that we do not like or refuse to take responsibility for, whether they be good or bad. So when the shadow is not evil, that's something that's been created in our culture. The shadow could be, I want to play the guitar. I can never play as good as Bob, so I'll never pick it up. So I don't want to take responsibility for a desire coming up from the wisdom body, so I'll just shove it in the shadow and I'll project, I'm getting ahead of myself, I'll project that on somebody else. Knowing the darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. So there's a lot to be found in the shadow. I want to get this across. It is a positive thing. There is gold in the shadow. Your personal gold is in the shadow. I can honestly say I'm up here because I've been hauling ass with the shadow, having a good battle back and forth. Trust me. Whether or not that's good or not, we'll find out. So, projection. The only way the ego, just going to get your attention back up here, the only way the ego knows what's in the shadow is through something called projection. Okay? So here we have our shadow. Here we are. Right? Walking the dog. We see somebody we don't like, whatever, you get a rattle. Oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, they're always blah, 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 blah. Okay? So here we are. Here's the shadow. Projection. It comes from the unconscious, the shadow, and it projects onto the ego. Therefore, the ego now sees through that projection on that person, on that culture, on that thing or whatever, it sees what's inside. If it wants to see, if it wants to do the work and see what's in the unconscious. Okay? So, the way, okay, now I'll go back to the slide. That's right. So, the ego and the shadow come from the same source. Unless we do the conscious work on the shadow, it's almost always projected. This relieves us of our responsibility for it. So you can project, the shadow or your desire, oh, I wish I went to university, blah, 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 blah. So you project it on church or state. Movie stars, they hold an enormous amount of projection from the culture, right? I mean, it killed Marilyn Monroe she had a dream before she died that she was the Virgin Mary at the church and everybody was coming to her. She could not contain that. It was projected onto her by an entire culture. You can project your hope, faith, progress, all those things you really want, you can project them if you like, onto a political person, an artist, or a couple. Gee, I wish I'd get married like them, Will and Kate. Okay? Now, if the projection, this work doesn't happen, you get into what we call the inflated ego. Anybody know who that boy is? The great Mussolini, Benito Mussolini. Poor guy, I mean, he's just a poster child for the inflated ego, isn't he? An inflated consciousness is always egocentric and conscious of nothing but its own existence. Now, think about cultures when I'm saying this. You can think about nations can be inflated. So consider this. An inflated consciousness is always egocentric, always conscious of nothing but its own existence, the World Series, incapable of learning from the past, incapable of understanding contemporary events, and is incapable of drawing the right conclusions about the future. It's hypnotized by itself and therefore can never be argued with. You know you're hitting shadow or projection when you try to make a point, and it just is not getting anywhere with somebody. Don't worry about it. It's shadow. Hey, cool. That's what you like. That's all right. And that's a tough one because you realize, you start to realize your emotions are showing you where the shadow is because it arrives through an emotion, and yet your emotions are so valued. And that becomes a little trick you have to work with later down the road. Anyway, it cannot be argued with. It inevitably dooms itself to calamities that must strike it dead. And if you know anything about the history of Benito Mussolini, that's what happened. Okay? Review. Psyche is Greek for butterfly, symbolizing transformation, also defines the totality of the human soul, including the conscious and the unconscious. The self is wisdom consciousness of the body itself, a totality, to be known. The ego I is the conscious organizing principle of the psyche. The ego's blind spot, the shadow, exists in the unconscious and is made visible to the ego through projection. Projection arrives to consciousness via emotional, psychological, physical, and intellectual affects. I don't think that's... Could be shadow. You never know. There's a great little poem. I do not like you, Dr. Fell. I do not like you very well. Something like that. I do not like you, Dr. Fell. Why? Thank you. The reason why I cannot tell, but this I know quite well. I do not like you, Dr. Fell. Projection. Okay? That's a real simple one. All right. Now we're back to cash. So we've been dealing with the money system, and then we went into the whole concept of psychology. Now we're going to get into the juicy stuff, the world reserve currency. We are pre-World War II. It's 1939. Everybody knows who that gentleman is. And the British pound sterling is pretty much one of the top, I would say, currencies in the world. This is pre-war. After the war, America becomes the dominant world power in 1945. How? The economic effects of World War II. So, Europe's industry is demolished. America builds weaponry, goods and services for Europe. All right? Europe pays with gold because they're too busy building armaments. If they can do anything, they're building armaments. So they pay for gold for other goods and services, and some of the bigger armaments they can't build. When the gold runs out, America loans them the American dollar. All right? So at the end of the world, America's flush with gold, and the rest of the world is flush with US dollars. All right? So there you've got your new concept. This is how everything went over to the West. And what started was the Bretton Woods Monetary Conference. So it was in 44. And what they established was that America would hold gold, value, silver, truth, in their central bank. Okay? They would print currency. It's still money because it's related to a value. And they would distribute it around the world. And internationally, if you were a country and you had this money and you wanted your gold back, hey, no window. Open up the gold window. How many American dollars you got? I will give you the gold at $35 an ounce. Okay? So this was the system that kept it stable for many, many years. Okay? So review. The individual to the global perspective. I'm going to try and tie the two together now. The battle of the political earth, psyche. So the individual, we have our individual psyche. We have a global psyche as well. And I would say that's probably the politics. World politics would be the global psyche. World War II is resolved. The world monetary system is backed by value, gold. All nations agree to trade their life energy, their currency, okay, for the American dollar that's backed by value, gold, money. So it's backed by it. In the world psyche, America is now the organizing principle. It is the ego for the world, okay? Metaphorically, remember, I'm just thinking metaphorically. Everything goes through the U.S. I mean, when you look at people from Zimbabwe want to wear Nike sneakers, what's going on? Something's happening at a subconscious level. And the world psyche now is the organizing principle, managing the value gold-based international monetary system. So things are pretty good. U.S. is, quote, king of the world. America closes the gold world. It was a gold window. Excuse me, I just got to have a drink. Thanks. 1971, it's called Nixon shock. Everybody remember? I remember Nixon. I'm old enough. So America's printing vast amounts of currencies now, even though it's got gold. But it's still printing currencies because you got Korea, you got Vietnam, you got social systems. All these things are happening. France realizes that the more currency they print, it's going to devalue this American dollar that they're holding an account to do trade. Like they're ripping them off. So Mr. de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle, isn't he French? He is so French. You can see this on YouTube. Honest to God, go back, type it in. De Gaulle talks, closes the gold window, blah, blah, blah. And he's giving this amazing speech about he will not sit back and watch the dollar be devalued, and it's fascinating. Okay? So he goes back, takes his American dollars in, gets his gold, a run on the bank. All the other nations start thinking, well, the hell with this. We're going to trade in our American dollars for gold too, and bang, the gold window's closed. Nixon puts up the out of business sign, and as is common, contracts are broken. Doesn't matter. It's just this is what we want to do. And remember, Nixon's not an economist, even though he's probably being, guided by economists. They tell him close the gold window. Now what's happened? This is fascinating. You have the entire world. So remember, they're still on the American dollar. That is the dollar of trade and is today still. But it is a fiat dollar. It has no gold, value, silver, truth sitting in its account. The only thing it has is the concept or idea of America as value. It is a fiat dollar. Fiat means by government decree. And in world history, there is not a single fiat dollar has survived. They all go to their intrinsic value, which is nothing. That's a historical fact. Okay, so now we're not attached to gold. There's nothing holding back the bankers from, yippee, turning the printing press on. And then we turn into currency wars. Highly, highly recommend reading this book or even watching the guy on YouTube. He's probably the most eloquent speaker I have ever heard. Yeah, right. I babble too much. Thank you very much, Mark. So let's go through. This is what's going on out in the world. Unhinged from the gold standard, the government is now free to print currency and devalue the dollar, because the more currency you have out in the system, what was only $2, an orange tube for $2 when you got $5 in the system, oh, that's only $1. Now you got $60 in the system, well, that orange can now cost $15 because you got more currency out there, right? It devalues the dollar. This devaluation results in lower prices for U.S. goods and services, so they become the export king. They just start selling everything everywhere, all over the world, because their dollar's the lowest valued dollar. There's no such thing as a strong dollar policy in the United States, and when I keep telling you that on TV, see, I'm starting to get into the shadow. Can you see? I'm getting, it's my heart. The most difficult aspect in this whole piece of work is dealing with the shadow. So, they are not telling you the truth. The fact is, they devalue their dollar constantly. Okay? So, world follows suit and devalues its currencies as well, because they want to remain competitive on the globalized market. A currency war erupts around the world. We're in the third currency war right now. Okay? The excessive amount of currency finds its way into asset classes. This is how bubbles happen. Ben Bernanke of the Federal Reserve can't tell you how a bubble happens, but this is it. You print a ton of currency, and it just floats around looking for a home. And I think a lot of that is a psychological thing. I think bubbles come from this area of the psyche, somewhere in here. You know, there's a value-based thing somewhere, and bang, people go for it. And I'm sure, you know, mass media helps that as well, as we'll see. So, excessive amount of currency finds its way to asset classes. These asset classes form bubbles. The bubbles pop. Very, very, very important. Instead of letting the debt work itself through the system via bankruptcies, where solvent companies buy out the insolvent companies and get their assets and create a better company, the U.S. Fed leads the way in excessive currency printing. They don't want the bubble to pop. The government gives money to these companies that should fail, these banks that should fail if it's a free market system. We do not have a free market system. This is not, a theory or, I don't know what I'm trying to say. We don't have a free market system. We're in a social system right now, where the government bails out everybody. It's actually, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll see exactly what it's titled a little further down the road. And as we used to say in our singing rugby songs, next verse, same as the first. A little bit louder and a little bit worse. We're getting to the end. We're getting close to the break, so just so you know, hang in there. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. That's John Kenneth Galbraith. Excellent, excellent slide. So as the currency in circulation, right? Okay. As it rises, the value, this is 1971, closes the gold window. The value of the dollar, where are we here? 20, so 100 cents, you're down to the value of it is, I don't know, what, 18 cents or something, from what it was in 71. That's inflation. Now remember, the inflated ego dooms itself, can't listen to anything. Inflated currency, inflated economy. Individual psyche, ego, world psyche, ego. Okay? Something's going on. There's a rabble happening. The inflation of the individual, incapable of learning from the past, incapable of understanding current events, and incapable of drawing the right conclusions about the future. The drawing of the gentleman there is John Maynard Keynes, and all of this economy is being run right now what they call Keynesian economics. There is basically Austrian economics and Keynesian economics. That is a disservice to Keynes. He never said, just loan out a bunch of money, go into debt, go into debt. He did say debt is a good way to build an economy, but only if you haven't got a lot of debt to begin with. So these guys out there on MSN and everything saying they're Keynesian economists, and actually Nixon's quote was, when he closed the gold window, was, "We're all Keynesians now." Okay? Well, he had a very telling quote. The inflation of currency supply. By a continuing process of inflation, government can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of the citizenry. Our dollar drops in value. We talked about this before last time. Our incomes haven't gone up in 15 years. Everything's going up and our income stays stagnant. Right? Okay, first half review. And we'll have a bathroom bail break. Gold and silver are money. Currency is just a claim on that money. The human psyche has revealed that gold is the metaphor of value. The birth of democracy revealed silver to be a metaphor for truth. We agree to trade our life energy for currency, money. The world's privately owned central banks, and I black these things out so we can get them. The world's privately owned central banks print currency, and the governments of the world tax the people to pay both the principal and the interest, thus producing perpetual debt. The world reserve currency, the US dollar, used to be backed by a ratio to gold value, but Nixon closed the gold value window in '71. The world reserve currency is fiat. The currency we trade our life energy for has no relation to value or gold, or truth or silver. All fiat currencies in history have collapsed to their intrinsic value, zero. The privately owned central bank, the Fed, inflates the world reserve currency through fractional reserve banking and currency printing. This devalues the reserve currency to remain competitive. Nations respond by devaluing their currencies. Through inflation of the currency supply, through the inflation of their currency supply by the privately owned banks. This policy creates the global currency war that we talked about. The inflation of the currency supply depletes the citizens of their vital life energy, which they've traded for a valueless, inflated currency. You're starting to see how local commerce is a really good idea? So, I'm seeing a lot of sad faces. Don't worry, things get really good, okay? Hang with me. Being too busy to investigate the monetary system, we have individually and collectively projected, or what I see now, invested our trust and our faith onto a privately owned banking system, an inflating valueless currency, and a government deeply rooted and complicit with the present system. The inevitable outcome for the inflated ego or the inflated economy, unwilling to examine its shadows or projections, is the same: a depression. Okay? Now I know that's hard-hitting stuff. It's break time. Trust me, it gets way, way better. And one thing to remember, in Chinese, there's a word I'll never be able to pronounce it. It's called Wei Li, and it's the word for crisis. It's a combination of two words: danger, opportunity. Okay? Keep that in mind. All right, let's get back into it. So, one of the aspects I'm trying to get across in the talk is what is most personal is also most universal. So, it's important to kind of hold the thought that what we're doing is we're going from the personal into the collective and back again. Because we're all, as Michael Jackson says, we are the world. Okay, multitude of nothing. Can you tell we're getting into the debt crisis? Just as the addition of however many zeros will never make a unit, the value of a community, and again, this is what this is about, it's community. The value of a community depends on the spiritual and moral stature of the individuals composing that community. And what I'm trying to get across is an equation for us to regain our value, our gold, our silver, basically, our life energy. becoming more conscious of who we are and where we are in this narrative. Authors research, if you spent $1 million a day since the birth of Christ, you still would not have spent $1 trillion. So that gives you an idea of how much a trillion is, and they're throwing around like used Kleenex right now out there. Okay, we left off at the valueless currency in the middle of inflation. Okay, so all that free money creates the bubble decade. We've never had 3 major bubbles in a decade before. It's just never come to that. Now, I would say I love mainstream media to not do what they're talking about. GetRich.com, crash. Home Sweet Home, crash. And of course, the committee that saved the world. If you watch Inside Job, which is an amazing video, you will realize that these 3 gentlemen were a big part of what created the enormous debt that is going on in America. Therefore, because of the world reserve currency, it's happening internationally. Greenspan, he started doing the money printing back in the 90s and hasn't really turned back. It is also a result of Bill Clinton. He brought in this new act in 1999, which ended the Glass-Steagall. Today, what we're doing is modernizing financial service industry, tearing down those antiquated laws and granting banks significant new authority. This is 1999. Now, with the Glass-Steagall, very important, that act came in after the Depression, and what it did was it separated banks. You have a commercial bank and an investment bank, okay? The commercial bank is the bank we would go to. It would hold our funds. It would actually have money in the bank. And it would just deal in these transactions of the personal transaction. The investment bank did hedging, all these languages. I still haven't a clue what they mean. I apologize. I've never been one of those people. So derivatives, anybody else? Throw them out if you know these names. Okay? Okay. Well, I don't know a lot of them, but I know the system itself, what's functioning. So anyway, what happened is he tore that down. So now banks, they can have your money and their money, and that what was a system that was sacrosanct. You would never, ever touch the personal money in a bank account. You would only use your money. Now, that is commonplace. They are taking people's money out of the banks and speculating with it. And they are losing. And we're going to get into that so you can understand what's going on. Derivatives and the mortgage crisis. This is from Warren Buffett, who, I have varying opinions on. His father, by the way, has an amazing article out on the web, and it's written how gold is needed for human value, for spiritual health, and for justice, and for a sound society. You need a gold-backed system. Warren Buffett calls it it's an antiquated metal. That's the phrase that's going around there now. So the apple fell really far from the tree there. Okay? So, yes. In my view, derivatives are financial weapons of mass destruction. I'm going to explain what a derivative is. Carrying dangers that, while now latent, are potentially lethal. The subprime mortgage was all based on a derivatives scheme, okay? And the thing I want you to keep in mind from now on when you leave, when you view a mainstream media, when you view anything, read between the lines. Cui bono means who benefits. All investigative reporters, that's burned into their brain. Who benefits? What's the story? Follow the money, okay? The origin of the debt crisis. Love this little cartoon. I thought we were just buying a house. Brokers, banks, appraisals, and Wall Street. Okay, that's pretty much it. And I will explain right now on my whiteboard the derivative. What caused it? Again, we have the upside down triangle. So the pattern. Remember the pattern? It's repeating itself yet again. Here we are, we the people, with what I would call assets, things of value, okay? The little home that we have, Okay? Now, so what they did was they took loans, the geniuses on Wall Street, and they packaged them, and they took about 60% of these, okay? And what they did is they pooled them with what they call other mortgages. Gosh, sorry, I'm forgetting the name right now.
Subprime.
Yeah, so they put all the mortgages together in prime, subprime, and then there was another one. Do you remember the name? I can't remember. But they bundled them all together, and when they do that, they call them securitizing. Okay? So they took 60% of those and put it into what's called subprime. These became investment vehicles. Okay? And that's securitizing. Now, I know I'm not going to have this absolutely right. This is very Chinese for me, and I've struggled very hard to understand this. Okay? These became what they called asset-backed securities, and they flipped them again. Okay? And they gave them AAA status, because Lord knows the rating agencies are in on this one as well. So they took value, okay, of we the people, real product, real things. Then they put them in a subprime. They put them all together. So taking the really bad ones, the okay ones, and the safe ones, put them all together into a subprime, and they securitized it. Then they took student loans, okay, car loans, right, credit card debt, okay, and they piled it again on that, and they re-securitized it, all right? Then from here, things get a little blurry, okay? They pooled these into what they called collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. You're starting to see a little bit of the inflation thing we were talking about before, okay? These now, they added to here, corporate bonds. Okay? And real estate investment trusts. All right? Take it again. Let's flip it again because there's so many geniuses on Wall Street. The international banks take these and they pool them into what they have special investment vehicles called CDO. What was the CDO again? Sorry. Collateralized debt obligations squared. And who knows what they threw on there? You know, the back fence. I have no idea. This is where I get a little, sorry. CDO squared, and I got to make it bigger. And they redid it again, securitized it yet again, because they're just so AAA good. And they called it CDO squared. Yeah, yet again. And all levels required more and more leverage. The result, okay, so what happens here is, as you can see, it just grows more and more and more. We, the people, again, are at the bottom of this. This here, these CDO squared, here's the Earth, right? India, wherever, okay, England, pretty bad. These now get sold to international banks, you know, investment banks worldwide, because they're so securitized, and that's how, when the loans get called, you've got a bank in Norway that fails because they bought so much of this. It's just like a domino. They all start going. Once one of these goes, and what happened was, these mortgages down here, okay, some of them were darn good. There were people who had money, they had down payments. A lot of them were liar's loans. You just had to be breathing. This is known, okay? They were liar's loans. They didn't have any money, they didn't have a job, they didn't have anything. And they got a mortgage because George Bush said everybody should have a house in America. I don't want to get into where that came from and who planned all that, but that is what happened. It's known. They were liar's loans. And of course, all these, they get bundled out. They get sold out. Now we go back to the loans. These amazing interest rates that they had, their mortgage rates that were fantastic for the first year, they get doubled. You've got, I got it somewhere. Don't quote me on my numbers, but you're getting into like just millions of defaults because they never had anything to begin with. All right? So these investment banks up here, they all collapse. Iceland, all these people. Remember, it's banks, right? It's very, very important. It is not nations, like they're trying to tell us, who have all these terrible sovereign debts. It is major banks, okay? And the governments are bailing out these banks. They're not letting them fail. And they're bailing out the banks with whose money? Who's paying for it? All the people are paying for this, all right? Except for Iceland. Because Iceland said, to hell with you. I'm getting ahead of myself probably. Iceland said, to hell with you, okay? They fired all the parliament, everybody. They took the bankers and they put them in jail where they belong because this is fraudulent, okay? They canceled all the debts. They said, no, we're not paying these debts because they were fraudulent to begin with. The rating agencies were fraudulent. Everything was fraudulent. We're not paying. And right now their unemployment rate is 6% and it increases. It drops every quarter. They're doing better and better and better because they went to the shadow. They went in there and they dealt with it. And they saw the good and the bad of the whole thing and they're dealing with it now. They're dealing with that energy and they're, in my opinion, adequately dealing with what happened, not bailing people out again and again and again because of a, perceived brilliance that's out there. And we'll get into that later. Okay. So what that whole thing is can be called speculation. The act of trading an asset or conducting a financial transaction that has a significant risk of losing most or all of the initial outlay in expectation of a substantial gain. That's what speculation is. Now, speculation is not bad. It's been going on for ages. It's how, investments run. A lot of them run on, certain speculations. You do your homework, But when it goes to a proliferated situation, an inflated situation, it becomes highly dangerous. And in my opinion, all you got to do is go back to Bob Dylan because he says it all. Steal a little, they throw you in jail. Steal a lot, and they'll make you king. Infidels. Look, a sweetheart like you. Okay, this is what it looks like. This is the exposure, the derivative exposure of 5 of the largest banks in America who are speculating. This is $238 trillion in derivative exposure. Each one of these is $1 trillion. It is down here, there's a person by a pallet, and I believe it's $100 bills of a pallet equals, I can't remember how much, $1 million, I think. You got the White House, soccer fields, World Trade Centers. That's what it looks like visually. Now I want to show you how it's leveraged. The big banks risk all with dangerous defaults on derivatives. Okay? JP Morgan, top of the list, 80-something trillion. Citibank, Bank, B of A, Wachovia, HSBC, all these banks. This is their assets. This is us. I like how they make us green. We're the go. Okay? This is us. Is that leverage? Is that like adequate leverage? I don't think so.
So Doug,
yes?
Can you go back for just a second?
Yep.
When you say big banks risk all with danger of defaults on derivatives, does that mean I don't understand, does that mean
Yep.
they don't have anything to give, or I don't understand?
Yeah, they don't have any assets to back up these speculative.
Just them printing money.
Well, they're not in the, the central banks print the money.
Yes.
That goes to the government or to other banks, okay? And JP Morgan, as you'll see later, I think I'll make that clear for you. They're getting a lot of money. Let's just put it that way, okay? So what they do is they take that and they create these derivatives. The value of those derivatives is that much, okay? But they don't have any assets to back it.
But isn't Morgan in the Fed anyway?
No. No, JP Morgan's a long gone human being who, he's an interesting character. But J.P. Morgan's just the name of a bank after this gentleman. Okay? Okay, so here we are. The world is drowning in a sea of debt, and the derivatives are the centerpiece or pinnacle. The official stats are shocking, almost unbelievable, but 1.5 quadrillion worth of derivatives exist and are traded on exchanges. These are just inflated investment vehicles. This number is actually, that has to do with, they're talking about what the world GDP is in relation to 1.5 quadrillion. Well, we're not that close. I think the world GDP is $60 trillion, something like that. I think that number, 60 to 70. So again, here we are, our house in the middle of the street, right there. Real assets, fractional reserve banking, derivatives. This is the system that we're involved in right now. Okay? Can you see how it's somewhat inflated? That there is a consciousness, a psyche at play here, is what I'm trying to get across. All derivatives and currency exist solely because of our assets through physical value, i.e. home, loans, or life energy confiscated through the tax system. These maintain the valueless private bank currency and the shadow economy it proliferates. This is very interesting. Asset definition, I'm right into words. Useful or desirable thing or quality. A single item of ownership having exchange value. Now let's get down to the origin, because you always go to the origin. Qui bono. It's an investigative reporter's thing. Go to the origin. Okay, assets. French, assez, enough. What is enough? How far are these guys going to go in their addiction to money? What is enough? And that was brilliant, because at the very beginning, if you remember that book, Change Your Relationship to Money, Mr. Rodriguez's work, all he got down to was finding out what was enough for him. Okay? And I don't, trust me, I'm not projecting this is our fault. What I'm trying to do is educate us as to where we are, because we have been involved in a system complicitly without knowing. It's not our fault. This has been going on for 20 to 30 years. Before we even had a dollar in our pockets, this was building up.
So you wouldn't say it's our shadow?
You can inherit shadows. You can. I think so. Art imitates life. I found this fascinating. 2000, the speculation is raised to an art form. While the derivative fraud is in full bloom, 2007, submortgage prime, right? Artist Damien Hirst convinces friends to speculate on this skull that he did. So in speculate, I mean what they did is did he loan them money, Mike? Sorry, was it? They loaned him money, and what they did is they started bidding up the price of this artificially, because they all owned his artwork as well. So they speculated, bidding up the price, knowing that all his other work would go up as well. Speculation, a result of financial innovation, has no connection to physical commodities or value. It is essentially an idea of wealth. It is synchronistic that Hearst chose the skull, metaphorical of the inflated ego, that it's seduced by its own ideas. This is the art world. Art is supposed to be metaphorical of what's going on at the time. 1952, Jackson Pollock is painting these amazing paintings called Convergence, and he's blasting everything, quote, wide open. And what's happening? They're discovering DNA. They're discovering the strand of the DNA. What's happening now? Speculation. They're inflating everything. The art world is telling us what's going on as well. Now, a big reason for all this happening is something called the fire economy, which is simply what I call the paper economy. Finance, insurance, real estate sector composed of banks, savings and loans, finance companies, securities, investment, Okay? Ties. Neckties. How's that? Sorry, I shouldn't say that. That's bad. It's shadow stuff for me. The fire economy operates by extracting economic rents, such as interest on debt, from the rest of the economy, and produces paper policies. I deal with this every single day. I have to have 2 or 3 engineers sign off on something when really, do we really need an engineer on this? Because there's a span table that me as a journeyman carpenter can go look at, and I can put that up. But insurance says, no, you can't. We need 3 of these guys and 4 of those guys. So There's a shadow here, okay? It's quite obvious. This is my shadow. Product versus paper. In a healthy economy, the fire sector should be approximately 6%. The production sector, all things having to do with the earth, the industries that extract, mill, manufacture, deliver, construct, are the remaining 94. There's more definitions, I'm sure, of what the remaining 94. The fire sector has inflated to over 40% of the economy. And that is also an indicator that your civilization is on decline when that happens. It happened in Rome. It's happened in nations before, when the paper economy starts taking over as opposed to the product. Paper, I would see as ideas, and the other one, product, things, value, commodity. Remember what the asset was, a valued thing. Sense of worth manifests as innovation or ideas that are unleashed on the economy with little or no practical concern for the outcome. It's produced a paper class of experts that is parasitic on the production sector. I'll show this. This will be much more appropriate later. I'll show you. Review. I just found this out, tonight. I was editing just before the talk. Eco is a suffix from Greek meaning home, house, household, affairs, dwelling. Isn't it synchronistic that the major meltdown is the subprime mortgage meltdown, dealing with home, dealing with economy, ecology. I know there's a lot of other ecos out there. Just one of these random things poets like to trip over. Okay, so we're doing a review. The value of fiat currencies are inflated around the world by privately owned central banks with the complicit aid of world governments, except New Zealand. They didn't get into this money printing thing. They said, no, we're not devaluing. Sorry. Therefore, things are still... I don't know. Sorry, I don't know. This inflation brought on by financial innovation expands the fire economy to 40%. Idle hands of the paper class, this is fascinating, create complicated equations that they win Nobel Prizes for that fail, okay, that eliminate risk. They eliminated risk through an equation. I found that God, they're brilliant, these people. Thus paving the way for obscenely leveraged derivatives, as I wrote on the board. This is known as the efficient market hypothesis. Remember, it's an hypothesis. Never really been tested. It's just on paper. This is an actual quote from Eastbrook and Fischel, who were a part of this whole system. A rule against fraud is not essential or even particularly important in the securities department. I'll say that again. A rule against fraud is not essential or even particularly important in the securities department. They pay these people, they make these equations, they write their doctorates, and the economy and the government goes with what they say. We might be dealing with some inflated egos at this point. Okay? All right, the privately-owned shadow banking industry inflates a housing bubble with liar loans. Again, look it up. It's out there. Everybody knows about it. No one's going to jail. While the rating agencies comply, granting AAA status, right up to the point, if you watch any documentary on this, they're selling it on one hand on the phone, and they're getting AAA, and they're saying, dump it to their friends. Don't touch it. Okay? AAA status is these weapons of mass financial destruction, the derivatives, are sold to unsuspecting, naive investors around the world. We, the people, and our grounded assets are the only real thing supporting these inflated financial delusions. Back to the psyche. The world psyche, individual psyche. The speculative housing bubble acts as a vacuum for individual and collective shadow, fear and or greed. This fully encouraged by the egoic delusions of mainstream media, Time, CNBC, CNN, etc. Now, if you want to see delusion in full play before the subprime meltdown, just type in Peter Schiff predicts housing bubble. And the shampoo, blow-dried heads on TV are going, oh, no, Peter. And they're laughing at him, and bang, it happens. Okay? And again, everybody I got my information from that I'm giving this talk predicted the subprime meltdown. Okay? They just don't want to see it. Remember, the inflated ego only sees itself, cannot be convinced of otherwise. It only knows itself. It's fascinating. What goes up must come down. Spinning wheels got to go round. So you get a deflation. Back to psychology, Robert Johnson. A rather intense looking guy, but actually he's fascinating. And I highly recommend, if you're interested in any Jungian, read Robert Johnson. He is the best-selling author of He, She, We, Inner Work, Inner Gold. I have that over here if you want to have a look at it. And Owning Your Own Shadow. Entirely simplistic, very small books. He met Jung when he was 24 years old. He had this unbelievable dream. Jung sat him down and said, this is what your life's going to be, from this one amazing dream that he had. And he's gone on to actually be probably the best-selling Jungian analyst, if that means anything to anyone. Any repair of our fractured world must start with individuals. Remember? Individual, collective. Collective, individual. Must start with individuals who have had the insight and courage to own their own shadow. Nothing out there will help if the interior projecting mechanism of humankind is operating strongly. The projection, the interior, there's the shadow, projects out, you can feel it, usually through anger, usually through some emotional thing, a rattling. It's tough, it's not easy, but trust me, it's worth the work. Okay, loans become due and defaults become rampant. There's the old housing bubble. The triangle topples, the deflationary cycle kicks in. These subprime mortgages were sold globally around the world. Deflationary spiral is halted by stimulus injection by the privately owned central bank. So Ben Bernanke has he wrote a book basically, he studied the Depression. He's preparing for the next war by looking at the last war, which, as all military people know, is a disastrous mistake. And he doesn't want what happened in the Depression to happen again. So if the sign of a deflationary spiral starts, like debt defaults, he jumps in with what's called QE, quantitative easing, and I'll get to that. Anyway, this is how it should actually happen. You have debt default, you have bankruptcies, and things actually flush themselves through the system. But that is not what's happening. Again, Time Magazine. They're just such a good counterintuitive device. The shadow is exposed and honest denial. Now, I got to work with my shadow on this, quite obviously. This is my big one, okay? And I really believe it's honest denial. I really believe that they are saving the system, that they believe they're saving the system, okay? So the delusional derivative debacle deflates. It's one of my faves. The free market would allow these bankruptcies to take place. So because of these, which started from fraud to begin with, created more and more fraud and were sold all over the world, these original people, they should be going bankrupt. They should be going to jail. They should be getting the just desserts in a functional system, not an inflated system, just a functional, grounded system called the free market. It would allow for the bankruptcies to take place. Banks do it all the time. The entity's assets are sold to solvent companies. The action of world governments and the privately owned central banks is that of an addict, a valueless currency addict, somebody in full-blown delusional ego, in my opinion. More stimulus, even the vocabulary. Just look at the vocabulary. I'm a poet. It's all about words. Stimulus injections. Okay? The global debt delusion of an inflated world psyche continues. So this is harsh. Hang on. But this is what's happening, and we're going to come through to the other side, all right? Stimulus injection scoreboard. We had the financial crisis, and by all rights, it really was going down the tube. We needed the injection. Cool. Who am I? I am a carpenter. Thank you for giving the injection. It gave us a little extra time. But in the meantime, you think maybe they'd start, putting some people in jail like they did with the S&L crisis. 2,000 people went to jail back in the 90s on the savings and loan crisis. They were prosecuted and put in jail. Okay? Now, so QE1 comes in. That's called quantitative easing, which is true. You inject a little stimulus. It's a viable term. So initial bailout, $800 billion. Quantitative easing 1,500 billion, which is 1.5 trillion. Quantitative easing 2, another trillion. Operation Twist, and that's when what they're doing is the Fed is actually buying America's treasury bonds because no one else will buy them anymore. So that's what's keeping the country going. So it's kind of cannibalistic in a way, okay? So the scoreboard's 3.7 trillion. All right? That's what it looks like. 2005, boom, up we go. Okay? Anybody who knows about exponential charts, it's a bit of a shocker. But wait, there's more, like the late night TV commercial. Bloomberg sued the Fed to force disclosure of the collateral, how much they actually were giving out. A further now released at 3.5 trillion to the American companies and banks, and yet still 12.5 trillion went to the European banks and financial corporations. So these are privately owned banks printing money that we pay for through taxes and the principal, and they're giving it to their other privately owned banks in Europe because the banks bought the bad loans that they all created to begin with. It's kind of a Ponzi scheme in a way. Okay? All at the cost of the American and global taxpayer. Total cost of the stimulus injection program is $19.7 trillion. Now here's the shocker. I don't know if it's on the next slide, so I'll just say it anyway. 19.7 trillion. What happens to that money? It also goes into the fractional reserve banking system, and it gets created. We are drowning in valueless currency all over the world. And it'll be our job to get the value back, and we can do it, in my opinion. So review. The insolvent, fraudulent, subprime derivative scheme collapses. The market self-regulates, and the overexposed, fully leveraged banks need to claim bankruptcy in order to fulfill the business cycle. That's what's called the business cycle, is when there's times where money gets printed, it gets malinvested, the business cycle collapses, they claim bankruptcy, the solvent companies pick it up. It's a cycle. It's been going on for years and years and years and years, okay? The world's privately owned banks and governments respond to this natural collapse of an insolvent investment by reinflating the delusion bubble. The shadow banking system is exposed as an addict. 19.7 trillion of valueless currency, which is a claim on our collective life energy. How are they going to pay this? They just printed it up. Someone's going to pay, has to pay this, okay? Which is a claim on our collective life energy, is injected into the addicted shadow banking system to be reinflated still again through the fractional reserve banking system. Go back to John Maynard Keynes. It repels the mind. That's what I'm seeing. Apocalypse how? Now, for whatever reason, this fabulous word has been given a negative connotation because it's linked with the end and guns and everything happening and just complete chaos. It is not. It is a Greek word, the birthplace of our democracy, and it means the lifting of the veil or the revelation. So in a way, we're in an apocalyptic event right here. We are revealing this shadow banking system. It's a disclosure of something hidden from the majority of mankind in an era dominated by falsehood and misconception. And that's what I saw. And being a carpenter, I have to do due diligence, which means you're a carpenter too. If you tear something out and you see it's wrong, you have to report it legally. I'm legally bound. So somehow that's carried over into this, and that's why I'm standing here, because this system needs an apocalypse, a revelation. Okay? When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. That's what we're up against. I'm assuming this Frédéric Bastiat is a Frenchman. It sounds very French. What are you saying? Philosophical. Timeline of the world's largest empires. Just to give us a clue, to get us out of the thing that we are the only ones happening. There's history for you. And U.S. is pretty small. And I want to make a point here. I don't want the U.S. to go down. I love what has come from that country. The greatest artists have come from that country. Bob Dylan has come from that country. Some of the world's greatest poetry has come from that country. It's beautiful. It's fascinating. The problem is it's been taken over. And we've been lulled to sleep. That's all. I want to get that across. Hopefully, if they go back to what the Constitution is, they've been stomping on it, that can happen. Okay, institutionalized corporate fraud. John Corzine steals $1.6 billion of customers' funds, then organizes a $35,000 plate dinner for the Obama campaign. He sat in Congress and said, they all look the same. I had no intention. I can't recall. It's like a 9-year-old boy. It really is. You want to go up and twist him by the ear. And that's what's going on out there. The savings and loan crisis of the 1990s, 2,000 people in the financial sector were prosecuted. To this date, no charges of anyone have been laid. Nothing. John Corzine still walks around. Farmers lost an enormous amount of money with this MF Global because that's where they would put their futures. And again, I'm getting into dangerous territory because I don't know much about that language. But he did what was allowed now because Clinton got rid of the Glass-Steagall. Banks used to be separated. Now they're together. Now he can go right inside and get the customers' funds. And there is an email that shows him doing it. It's out there. Nothing's happening. Listing of donors. Could this be an actual reason why he's walking free? List of donors in the $500,000 to $1 million category. Who's there? John Corzine for the Obama campaign. There's a fraudulent system creating currency that feeds a fraudulent political system that needs that currency in order to get elected. This is what we're dealing with. None of it based in value. And this is the quote I wanted to get to a while back. Fascism should be more appropriately called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power. And that's what we're in. This is the apocalypse. This is the lifting of the veil, in my opinion, right here, right now. It is not, as I hear people say in coffee shops, unfettered free market activity. There are rules upon rules upon rules upon rules. The Ponzi scheme by, what was the latest guy? Help me here, somebody. The guy that was just put in jail forever. Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff's scheme was fully mapped out, charts, everything. It was all laid out. And for 10 years, this guy brought it to the regulatory councils. I can't remember their name, FTC, all these different names. For 10 years in a row. So it's got nothing to do with regulation. Don't go get more regulation. That doesn't matter. If you don't use it, it isn't going to work. It's a fraudulent system. So we're moving towards fascism is what's happening. And that's frightening to me. Matthew 7 verses 16 reads, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." I really agree with this one. You can talk all you want, but what is it you do? GE got $16 billion in bailout loans. And they say it compromises NBC News because NBC News is an affiliate, and they can't say that because NBC News is their affiliate. GE is also one of the major military contractors for the United States. And lo and behold, they didn't pay any taxes on their $14 billion in profits. And let's go back to JP Morgan. We were talking about food stamps. JP Morgan and the bank industry profit from misery. This week's credit check, a record 43.6 million Americans are using food stamps. And Obama has been on TV, I'm not dissing him, this is a system, him and Napolitano or whatever her name, saying, we need more food stamps. Because if you give people food, they'll vote for you. If you cut off their food, they won't vote for you. They want people complicit with the system. They don't want individuals, they don't want value, they don't want people making individual decisions. They want you on food stamps. And another reason is JP Morgan's segment of that, who makes the food stamp debit cards, made $5.47 billion in 2010. Okay, now let's look where these guys are in the political system. Goldman Sachs, Bank, Microsoft Corp, JP Morgan Chase, these are all Obama top contributors. Okay, you can get it on that website there. All the banks, Time Warner, major media. Right? All these people. General Electric, Morgan Stanley, U.S. government. I think what that is I looked that up, is if you make a donation, yourself, and you work for the government, it goes under the government. You're allowed only $1,000 or something like that. Attention, shoppers. To me, this is the reason why this is all going down. The citizen has become the consumer. Obama wins the Ad Age Marketer of the Year. Love the artwork. Honest to God, when I saw it, it blew me away. I thought, man, is that ever good. The problem was, I was buying an ad campaign. Because for 30 years, because of inflated currency, all I really know is consumer products and things. And my psyche is educated to see ads and drool and buy. Amazing, eh? He beat out the short list. He beat Nike, Coors. It's an ad campaign. It's not based on platform. It's not based on anything. Review. I just wanted to put that beautiful quote up there again. You know it? Okay, review. Privately owned central banks inflate the valueless currency supply to the benefit of the shadow banking finance system. This currency is a claim on our life energy. The largest banks and corporations in the shadow banking financial system contribute the greatest amount of valueless currency to the political candidate. As you saw, right? We could go back. Banks, they're the major contributors of the banks. So who's going to put a guy in bank when he gives you the money to get elected? It's real simple. Follow the money. Okay? Due to the inflation of the valueless currency supply over past decades, we've moved from citizens. Remember that? Remember that word? Citizen? I hardly ever hear it anymore. Consumers. We're all consumers. Okay? Citizens concerned about the products of politics. I remember fighting free trade, man. That was sweet because that was a fight. People knew some of the stuff that was going down, and it was a lot of fun. You really got my teeth into that one. The laws, the bills, what's the platform, the things that the politics are talking about. We've moved to the consumer of the image of a political psyche, the image of a leader. Not what are you going to do? You don't tell me this and tell me that and tell me this, because he's told us this and he's told us that, and I didn't want to get into it here, and he's gone against almost everything that was a part of his platform. He's gone the other way. Okay, this image is constructed by Wall Street savvy ad campaigns which further inflate our projections or our emotional investments of good and bad that we will not take responsibility for. And we can't if we're not aware of it. Global debt bubble. Someday, son, all this will be yours. Well, at least someone's laughing. Here we are. This is what it looks like visually. Keepers of the world's valueless reserve currency are in an upward debt spiral. So what are we here? 16.5 trillion. That's 2010. That's gone higher than that. Okay? So when they, just so now, when you watch TV and they say, the recovery is sputtering. Here's the image you need to have in your head. There's the printing all that time. Picture a sink with a plug in it. It's full of water. Along comes the debt crisis. Someone pulls the plug. The water goes down the drain. They fire on the faucet. No one's plugged that drain. They just keep the faucet going. Okay? That's QE1, QE2, twist. And right now, the Federal Reserve is in one of their triannual meetings in Jackson Hole, and they're trying to, what the hell are we going to do? 10 to 1, they'll come up with another one. Okay? And I think what it's going to be is nominal GDP. They're just going to keep giving the government, printing the government money so they keep the GDP at a certain rate. Okay? So there's your image. Debt to GDP. I now call GDP growing delusional paradigm. The gross domestic product is the measurement of a country's prosperity. A higher GDP attracts investment and allows you to borrow more. Stimulus injection is added to the GDP. So anything that they had on their books gets to go on GDP. But it isn't anything. It's a valueless currency to begin with. In a study spanning 800 years of global financial records, that should say, or data, Reinhardt and Rogoff have surmised that a debt to GDP ratio of 90% will induce cancerous effects on the economy. Debt to GDP. So you can have a debt to GDP, but it shouldn't be over 90. Total debt and total debt to GDP. This is world, okay? So the debt to GDP, when you combine all bank assets, all of these, in 2010 was 340. U.S. debt clock. So here's a bunch of countries, and they're, I mean, I don't think we can trust China's information. They're only at 10%, okay? England, 491. Germany, 2008. This is external debt, what they owe to countries, and then what they owe to themselves. You can look this up, okay? I've been looking at it for 2 years. Oy vey. It's, and where are we? Are we here? We're here. We here?
Yeah,
Canada, 90%. We're at the dangerous place. And this is a couple weeks ago. Honest to God, it changes every day. So here's the U.S. debt clock. Again, this is on the internet. International debt, 15. This is 16 now. Okay? For sure. Okay? Now, let's look at their unfunded liabilities. 119 trillion. Total U.S. debt, 56. Is that 56? Again, when you're watching TV and reading in the paper that the recovery is coming along and they crack these numbers out, you guys make the decision. I'm showing it to you. You decide what you think about those numbers. Yes, sir?
Debt, it seems like you have to owe it to somebody, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody else is on the other side of all
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there's an axiom that all trades...
if every country is in huge debt to every
Yeah,
other country,
yeah.
can't they just kind of like
That's
equalize things in?
brilliant. Yeah, they could. They could do what they call what's it called? A debt forgiveness, but there's another name, debt bazaar or something like that. I can't remember.
Our kids are
Yeah.
choking in debt, but who
Exactly.
are going to have to pay that debt to? Like, who's going to benefit from it?
Exactly.
The capitalists or whatever, the 1% that is behind all this?
I would, well, a lot of it, I think, is the private central banks, to be honest with you. They're printing the valueless
So we
currency.
owe the money to the bankers.
But isn't China
The
own
people
the
itself.
United States?
Pardon me?
Isn't China?
China? Yeah, we're getting to that. Okay, China does own a lot of T-bills. They've been slowly selling them. They don't want to panic the American dollar dropping. Yeah, and they've been buying commodity things. They've been buying mines, oil sands in Canada. They've been buying nothing but things. And China's China. They're still killing Tibetan monks and Tibetans. To me, it's outrageous. So, I mean, there's your shadow, right? They just praise China for this and that, but there's a shadow. And I think that's what's coming up. I think this is the revelation of the shadow that's been going on for many, 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 many years. The rubber on our tires comes from the Congo, and, millions of people were killed for that. But, we don't need to look at it. We never had to. And that's what I'm saying is we're coming to a revelation here. Anyway, yes, debt bazaar is what they call it, I think. And they just forgive everybody. And that's been proposed. But watch out what's happening in the mainstream. They're moving towards more and more rules, getting rid of your individual rights. That's what's happening. USA can now come, I'll just wipe that. The USA can now come into Canada with their military to help us out with civil disobedience and, skirmishes. Yeah, people wearing masks, exactly. Anyway, things like that are happening. Okay, this is what it looks like now. I'm going to go through these quickly. World Central Bank balance sheets. Bing! Okay, the stimulus package, QE1, QE2, Operation Twist. I need Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in here to keep going. Canada, we're printing. European central banks, they're printing. Bank of England is printing. Bundesbank in Germany. Singapore. China. Australia. Bank of Japan, they've been struggling for years. Right now what's happened, because all the banks had to belly up with money, this has never ever happened before in the history of the world. All world markets are trading the same since 2007. Hello, I felt it was very important that we insert these next two slides, as from the time that I finished this talk and we went into editing and everything, the Federal Reserve announced QE3, so I wanted to get some information up on that so we have some understanding of it. So on September 13th, 2012, the privately owned Federal Reserve announced QE3. What does this mean for all of us? They've announced $40 billion of currency will be printed up every month and spent purchasing toxic mortgage-backed securities off the privately owned banks' balance sheets. Okay? This total will increase to 80 or 80 around 85 billion in December of 2012 as Operation Twist is then rolled over into this round of economic stimulus. Now the really important thing to look at here is this was announced September 13th and it is open-ended. Therefore, it's unlimited printing of currency supply. So the banks will take this 40 billion, which will also be 80 billion. They will, using fractional reserve banking, the upside down pyramids that I talked about in the first half, okay, they will then create 360 billion through the fractional reserve banking. You can double that, so my math is terrible. I'm not going to attempt it. It's probably going to be, what, 700 billion a month? Close to. Once it gets up to $80 billion. Okay, and what they're doing is they'll be taking that money and purchasing U.S. treasuries and credit default swaps to hedge against the collapse of the dollar. So, what's happening here? Could it be the private banks know something is going on? This engineered Hegelian dialectic is what it's called, where you create a problem and then therefore you get to create the solution. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, in order to keep up with this, as I've explained earlier on, in order to keep up with the debasement of the American dollar in printing that much currency every month, $40 billion a month, increasing to $80 billion a month, all the other world currencies who are in competition with the American dollar, remember it is a fiat dollar, not backed by anything of value, other than say the petrodollar, which is the oil dollar, they will have to print themselves. So all other countries are going to have to print to stay relatively competitive with the US dollar. So this is a race to debase. Now, how is that going to translate for us? It's kind of what I said already earlier, so I'll just go over it briefly. We will get we'll get a greater price inflation in gas, food, and other essential commodities. The value price of gold and silver, the only true money that can't be printed, has no counterparty risk whatsoever, will rise into proportion of the debasement of the world currencies. So as all these currencies, because they're flooding the market, the currency is worth less, and less, well then you just need more of it to get real money. So it's not as if gold is becoming more valuable. Everything else is becoming more expensive because the currencies of the world are depreciating in value. So gold and silver, the precious metals, they'll retain that value because there is no counterparty risk. It's a natural occurring phenomenon of the market. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of that. Please check it out on the internet, QE3 stimulus program injection. So that's a big one, in my opinion, because now we're moving towards some kind of a hyperinflationary scenario if you're printing that much money. And also what's happening is, as that money gets printed, its ability to change the market decreases each and every time. And as a matter of fact, I'll see if I'm going to insert one slide to show exactly that it's like any injection stimulus. Any addict, you just need a little bit, then you need more and more and more and more. And as one economist said, and I can't remember their name, our economist are a very wise person, although it sounds incredibly simple, it is a truth to view all of this money printing on, and that is that which cannot continue will not. It has to end. And I know that's very simplistic, but if you sit with that for a bit and consider what that means, you'll realize this can't continue. Okay, so let's get back to the talk, and I hope you're enjoying it. Cheers. So this is the entrance into, I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. It's just a fascinating thing. So usually if one market went down, there was another market, available. You could shift funds, I wouldn't. Jesus, I'd take it from this pocket and put it into that pocket. But that's what's going on. History does not repeat, it rhymes. Mark Twain. This is from Mike Maloney's book, and I'll speed this up. This is where we are. A sovereign state starts with good money, backed by gold or silver. It develops economically and socially, begins to take on more economic burdens, adding layer upon layer of public works and social programs. As its economic affluence grows, so does the political influence. And it increases expenditures to fund a massive military. Don't need to tell you about where that is. Eventually, it puts the military to use and expenditures explode. And usually, militaries are put to use to get things from other countries. To fund the war, the costliest of mankind's endeavors, it steals the wealth of its people by replacing their money with currency that can be created in unlimited quantities. It does this either at the outbreak of the war, case of World War I, or during the wars, in the case of Athens and Rome, or as a perceived solution to economic ravages of previous wars. That's a fascinating case, John Law. Finally, the wealth transfer caused by the expansion of the currency supply is felt by the population as a severe consumer price inflation, triggering a loss of faith in the currency. I think we're right in between here. An en masse movement out of the currency into precious metals and other tangible assets takes place. The currency collapses, and massive wealth is transferred for those who had enough foresight to accumulate gold and silver, read truth and value early on. Now, if you guys are investors, take that and do what you want. If you're energy investors of the human psyche, like myself, I want to connect more to value and truth. This is what I think is happening here. We are seriously at a world tipping point right now. Utterly fascinating. All of us are involved in the economy. All of us. You can look outside, and I had a little matrix moment when I sat there one day and I went, they're wearing something that was bought. They're going to buy something. They ate something that was bought. They're eliminating into something that was bought. Everything's bought. Everything's currency. We're all in it together. And I think that's an amazing opportunity. And I know that sounds maybe like head in the sand, but to me it is. It's a staggeringly amazing opportunity. We're all going to be on the same page. Review. Too much debt. Debt is the energy of our psyche invested or projected onto the current economic or political system. That's my definition of debt. We're at a turning point in world history. Time to return to sound money, life energy, consisting of value and truth. And I'm not trying to be moral here or anything. I'm just talking about the shadow and projection. This is a fascinating poem. I remembered since grade school. No idea why. This stuck in my head forever, and all of a sudden it popped out. Oh, east is east, and west is west, and neither the twain shall meet, till earth and sky stand presently at God's great judgment seat. I don't know if this is prophetic or not, but the east and the west, they're coming together. The BRIC nations, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they're aware of all of this going on, and they've met for a summit to start their own bank, and it's going to be backed by gold and silver. It will be backed. It will have value. It will have, and I'm not projecting that they're full of truth because they're doing this, but what I'm saying is people are seeing this, the world is seeing this and not agreeing. It's difficult for us because we're within it. Even the IMF agrees. The people who say, keep buying the dollar, keep going into stocks, they agree value is everything. IMF to buy gold worth $2.3 billion as the credit risk increases. This is fascinating. The U.S. So we have, I don't know if it says there, sorry. I think it's 10 states. 3 of them have already passed laws that gold and silver can be used alongside currency. Okay? Something is happening, and it's being legislated in to protect themselves against whatever is happening. So people are thinking. And just so you know, the Texas Teachers Pension Fund has bought, I do not know the exact numbers, but it's big. I think it's like billion-ish. Okay, I'm sorry I don't have the numbers. Of gold, physical gold, and it's storing it on site. They built a vault, they have guards. the Texas Teachers Fund. Look it up. As the dollar drops, precious metals, truth and value increases. This is a valueless currency that's going down, and gold goes up, right? It's not that gold is going up in price, it's that the dollar is dropping in value. And everybody, this is the way it was for years, until they took it out of the education system. James Rickards remembers going to school and studying the gold standard, and anybody 5 years after him didn't study any gold standard. It was all about, currency, valueless money, so we can print it up and do what we want. Okay, here we are at the end. Thank you very much for sitting with me. I want to offer you what I've come to see as how to move through this, how this is danger and opportunity, to use the Chinese phrase. I say we reverse the pyramids that we ourselves are supporting. This could actually be the time when we, the people, actually start running things. So, psychological. This is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I found it fascinating. I'm not going to go through it all. But when it says breathing, I really mean breathing. I really mean anchor yourself. Okay? When Bernie Madoff did his thing, there was a gentleman whose name I don't know. His family loaned money to Louis XV. We're talking generational wealth. Contacts beyond compare. He committed suicide because he lost his money. He had no anchoring, no breathing, no connection to that which was around him, to the value of friends, family, people, books. God, I love books. Right? We're talking value. So when Abraham Maslow says breathe, breathe, motherfucker, breathe. That's how you anchor yourself. Otherwise, this takes over and everything gets inflated and you've been creating chaos. Jung said, the world hangs by a slender thread. It is the psyche of man. What if something happens to the psyche? Well, this is what you do. You go to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This has value. And the fact that we even poo-poo it, if somewhere in the back of our minds poo-poos it, displays how much we've been conditioned to not believe in value. So, let's go up. Security of body, employment. Local, 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 local. That's what I think. I love that market that goes on out there. I love coffee shops. I love sharing music and stuff like that. That again is community. Friendship, family, sexual intimacy. Get to know who you're with, so to speak. Esteem, self-esteem, confidence, achievement, respect of others. So much of this can come through dealing with projections because it becomes the anchor. You don't throw it out there anymore. And I'll tell you something. I've done a lot of work with projections. I've done a lot of work with the shadow. And you know how you nailed it? It is entirely unappetizing to see in yourself that you are that which you have been projecting on that person. Quick one. Brian Mulroney wanted to kill him. Seriously. I was incensed by what was happening to Canada. I figured, always raging. I was a rash walking around and people were getting out of my way because I was inflated. Okay? Now, here's the thing. I knew something was up. It had to take years for me to figure this out. I knew something was up. I decided, okay, I gotta work this shadow out. So what I thought, okay, I looked at him and me. Okay, there's probably still something there. But what I did find out is I wanted to find something I could respect. So I read a bit about him. I found out that Mulroney was an amazing taskmaster, probably one of the best that this country's ever seen. He could frickin' get her done. So I read that, I took it in, okay, did a little ritual, okay, I see this in Mulroney, he is a human being, blah, 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 okay? A couple days later, I have a dream, okay? Wisdom of the body. I have this dream. The dream is I'm at a political gathering. There's a long lineup. Balloons everywhere. You know those things. Balloons everywhere. Liberals, whatever, progressive conservatives. There's a long lineup, and I'm in the lineup, and I realize I'm going to go meet Brian Mulroney. Holy shit. Okay, don't kill him, right? And then I see him, and I shake his hand, and I say, Brian Mulroney, I just want to say how much I respect your talent for getting things done. You're an incredible taskmaster. Thank you very much. Oh, he's taken aback. I go sit down. Brian Mulroney comes up to me. That part of myself comes up to me and talks to me. So there's no division anymore. I'm not projecting anymore. This dream is showing me it's coming back. I have that energy. This is what everybody wants. Every country wants energy. It's ridiculous how much they're addicted to this energy thing. Well, here it is. It's a simple equation. And he sits down and he wants to talk about his new policies and everything. And I say, Brian, I don't agree with your policies. I don't think it's good for Canada, but I respect you. Thank you very much. There's my dream. It happens. It works. It's amazing. Now, self-actualization. Lack of prejudice. I would say that probably has to do with you do the projection work. And this is the one that blew me away. Acceptance of facts. So when you hear a fact and you rage, probably the shadow. An adult accepts facts. No. An adult listens, okay. I find the definition for an adult for me is a person who can entertain an idea they do not agree with. Okay? And what we need right now, what I think is happening is we're going from an initiation, world initiation. I think a lot of areas of the world are just fine, to be honest with you, that haven't had all the money and all the crap. This is for us, Western world people, with things. We're going from an initiation, from an adolescent mindset to an adult mindset. I think that's what's going on, if you want to know. And we're going to be asked to accept facts. So how do we turn the situation around? Get out of physical and psychological debt. Withdraw our projections upon the political, financial system. Question what you hear, see, read in and on mainstream media. No one got the collapse on mainstream media. Peter Schiff was on. There's a couple others that they let on for 8 seconds. Right? Retrieve your projected gold and integrate our own darkness. We integrate our darkness, they don't get money to build machines of war. This shit happens at another level. Yes, it happens here, and it happens at another level. I firmly believe. I shouldn't say believe. It is my experience. Reconnect with value and truth in your own life. We got a great place to live here. Local. Focus on resiliency. So, I've taken it upon myself to learn how to can. And a lot of this stuff, okay, this is not new. Our mothers did this. Study up. If you feel it's right for you, invest in silver or gold bullion as a hedge against the currency devaluation. But do not project safety onto these metals. They're just metals. Okay? And again, I am not this is my little thing. I am not an investment advisor. This is not advice. This is just me proposing my opinion. Okay? Establish and maintain a system of self-connection. Self-connection, that's what we were just talking about. That doesn't include commerce or media. Try not to buy something one day. So this is a story you can have in your head, because stories are the way things are healed. It's the way things are resolved. And just so you know, when you're watching mainstream TV, that's just their story. You don't have to buy it. It's just a story. Task of Psyche. This is a beautiful painting by Klimt. So Psyche enraged Aphrodite. Okay, I don't want to go into all that, but it's fascinating. Aphrodite issued several tasks that, if not completed, would mean death to poor Psyche. Psyche, the soul, all that is humanly knowable. Aphrodite, goddess, immortal. So we got a little bit of a play going on here between the two. Okay? The first task was to separate a proliferation of the smallest seeds and grains of sand into separate piles. So there's Psyche on the ground. This is your task. This is your first task. She's a goddess. and tips over this enormous vase. It busts, mustard seeds, all kinds of different seeds, plus grains of sand from different, oceans, different streams, everything. And it has to be separated by morning or off with your head. And she's mortal. It is off with her head. First thing, she weeps. Very, very important. She has an emotional connection to herself. She weeps. In all tasks and in all myths, the heroes weep first. So if this presentation is pissing you off or something happens or it triggers something and some emotions come up, awesome. You're connected. She weeps. She regards the task, in front of her. She takes it into her body, breathes, connects, and sets to work to this task that can never be completed. And she knows it can never be completed, just like what we saw. This is insane. It'll never. And she focuses, and she does it, and nature comes in and helps. And all the ants from the entire castle or wherever they are, they come in and they sort the seeds for her. Okay? Now, this is not a fairy tale, and I believe in fairy tales for their psychic vault of information. The metaphor of that is when you're regarding these tasks, when you're looking at dealing with your shadow, projection, all these things, the current state of affairs, and it looks like there's no fucking way I'm going to get through this. Breathe, relax, calm down, get into it, deal with it. I mean, I had a lot of information here. I had to get into this talk. And the nature, your dreams, the wisdom of the body, this comes through. I mean, it's look at, you see how many, remember how many empires were gone? We're here. We're in this great little opera. And we're in a pretty interesting state of the opera. So, this is where I sell you the condo in Mexico. Thanks for coming. No, I'm not selling you nothing. Other than this. This is my website, which is still going through stuff. I want a lot of this website is going to be about Banff. I'm going to have a section called the Banff Tribe, in which I want to have Mike and Karen and Cindy and other people, whoever wants to, talk to me. We can get our goods on there. We can sell. I want to promote Banff as a place to live. There are a lot of people leaving the U.S. A lot of people. And they need a place to go. And they'll have ideas. And they'll have energy. And they'll have, commitment. So this is going to get launched. August 31st is when I want to launch it. So I'm in the midst of working full time, doing this talk, and trying to get this thing ready as well. So what it is if you go to it, you click on an apple, and that's one of the things, because I grew up on apple orchards. I love it. And this has roots. And in the roots, if you want to do some dream study, you want to understand dream study, you want to get into, more about projection, Jung, Joseph Campbell mythology,